Hello, I'm Bea Cupin, and you are watching Rappler. This is In the Running, our ongoing coverage of the 2022 national elections. Just a few minutes ago, the first presidential forum, featuring 5 out of 6 leading presidential aspirants, wrapped up. The KBP invited Vice President Leni Robredo, Senator Panfilo Lacson, Senator Manny Pacquiao, former Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Manila Mayor Isko Moreno, and Labor leader Leody de Guzman to the forum. Marcos Jr. skipped it, citing scheduling conflicts. Let's make sense of what happened. Joining me in today's panel, please welcome Rappler's editor-at-large, Marites Vitug, Rappler columnist and editorial consultant, John Nery, Rappler regional coordinator, Inday Espina-Varona, our resident economist, JC Punongbayan, and my fellow reporters, Lian Buan and Sofia Tomacruz. We'll also be joined by reporters covering the presidential candidates later on in the show. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a 3-hour show. May mga PowerPoint presentation, may mga tech glitches as you do in the pandemic age, more than a few quotable quotes, and as John pointed out earlier, mga go-to lines ng mga kandidato. What were your initial, or what stood out from the forum earlier? Let's start with John.
Well, hello, Bea. Aside from the historic presence of an actual labor leader, I was most struck by the closing statement of Mayor Isko Moreno when he found common ground with all the candidates except Vice President Leni Robredo and the missing ex-Senator Bongbong Marcos, which tells me that he's really doubling down on his third force strategy for the elections.
Leading into that, let's talk to Lian Buan. The candidate that you cover, Senator Marcos, was absent from the forum earlier. What was he doing, Lian? Sabi nga may scheduling conflict.
Yeah.
Ano bang in conflict sa forum kanina?
Well, yesterday, reporters were asking him, ano po ba, you don't have to tell us where, and but you just have to tell us what. At sabi ni Attorney Vic Rodriguez, his spokesperson, sabi niya, I don't have the duty to disclose it to someone else. And I think that got them backlash again. So kanina, 27 minutes ago, Bongbong Marcos posted an IG story showing him sitting down with Corina Sanchez for the presidential interviews. We know, though, that these interviews are going to air this weekend. So, that their camp has been reactive so far. Kung ano yung backlash, yun yung re-respondan. So that's my Marcos take for the forum that he skipped.
Marites, pinag-usapan natin kanina, 'di ba, yung numbers of BBM. But what are your what things stood out from the forum earlier for you?
Yeah, of course, apart from the absence of Marcos Jr., because we know that he's leading in the polls. And I think it's a calculated risk that his camp takes. It's part of the deliberate tactic and strategy to evade interviews from independent media personalities. So having said that, what struck me is how someone's life story is the anchor of his platform. Manny Pacquiao and then Isko, they both said in their closing statements that they rose from poverty and they have been successful. So that's their main selling point. And Leody also used his experience as a labor leader and his economic class as an anchor of his platform. So doon ako na-strike ako na buhay, life story can really be an anchor for someone's platform.
Maminday, was there anything that impressed you, anything that surprised you from the forum this morning?
Well, I wasn't surprised by the absence of Marcos, obviously, but without focusing on any one thing that Leody said, I am impressed that here's an unabashedly leftist candidate who supports all the programs of the National Democratic Front, who talks about long-term goals, being listened to in equal footing with the other candidates and politicians of what we call elite politics. I think for me, long shot na manalo si Leody, pero that was an important thing.
Sofia, you cover for Rappler a lot of important topics, specifically COVID pa lang, no? Parang, what are your thoughts? Did any proposal stand out? Were there enough questions asked about the topics that you cover, the COVID response and maritime security?
Right, Bea. So unlike other reporters, I cover specialty issues. So COVID being one of them, West Philippine Sea or foreign policy. And really what struck me the most is the lack of, what you said, the lack of questions. And I really would have wanted candidates to go into detail about these important issues. But I think what stood out to me, for example, is that, we talked a lot about how we're going to be, the forums touch a lot on how we're going to be funding all these ambitious plans and proposals. But really, the pandemic isn't going away anytime soon. It's a long shot. The end is still a long time away. And so it struck me that we didn't talk about, exactly how these presidential aspirants plan to herd us out of this immediate health crisis that we're in. And so, and it's the same for issues like the West Philippine Sea and our maritime security, because these also touch on real everyday problems that Filipinos face, food security and protection of our maritime resources.
We'll talk about this later, but other things that we feel could have been touched more on, women's issues, education, for instance. Pero dun tayo kay JC muna kasi on the flip side, parang ang laki ng emphasis on questions about the economy, specifically kasi nga ang grand ng proposals ng mga kandidato natin, ano yung path, paano ba mafafund yung mga proposals nito. JC, did anything stand out from the forum this morning?
Yes, Bea, actually marami tayong narinig ng mga programs and policies about the economy, pero there was surprisingly little answer when it comes to how these are going to be funded. We heard some answers, but it's not enough for me, especially in light of the upcoming implementation of the Mandanas ruling, which boosts the funding of local government units. So many of these programs and policies really depend on the capacity of these LGUs, but unfortunately, we didn't hear anything about it.
Thanks, JC. We will, Jairo Boledo will be joining us in the call. Jairo covers Calyodi de Guzman for Rappler. Ito yung first na, hindi naman first pala, sorry, I want to correct myself. Pero ito yung parang first time siguro na sabay-sabay mga kandidato featured in one platform, nakasama si Calyodi din. Syempre, ang laki ng backlash nung earlier versions of interviews and forums na hindi sinama, or sorry, interviews and one-on-ones na hindi nakasama si Calyodi. Jairo, tell us about this and why is it important to see someone like Calyodi in platforms like these?
Yes, Bea, this is very important, especially that since nag-file si Calyodi ng candidacy no October, ito yung first time niya na makakasama sa isang forum or interview or debate yung mga fellow presidential aspirants niya. Very, very, very historical din siya. Kasi nga, ito din yung first time na maririnig personally nung kanyang mga kalaban, yung kanyang platforms. Kasi alam naman natin na hindi siya nabigyan ng pagkakataon during the Jessica Soho interviews as well as the Boy Abunda interview. Maganda yung naging performance niya kanina. If you're gonna look at Twitter, aside from VP Lenny Robredo, marami din siyang supporters on Twitter. And nakikita natin yung response ng mga tao sa kanyang sagot, at the same time, yung pagkabilib nila sa kanya. Kasi talagang on point yung mga sagot niya, yung mga yung talagang nag-prepare siya for this interview. Sinabi niya kahapon sa isang statement, sinabi niya na nagbabasa talaga siya ng mga balita at talagang nire-review niya yung platforms niya. Even ginagawa niya yun for the past 38 years as a labor leader. Kanina, in-highlight niya yung platforms niya on contractualization, on regularization rather, on economic platforms na kanyang hinahatid. At the same time, isa pa sa mga naging highlight ng kanyang performance kanina ay yung pag-reiterate niya ng kanyang anti-Marcos stance. Kasi alam naman natin na isa sa mga bagay daw na nagpatakbo sa kanila ni Bolden Bello ng kanyang running mate sa eleksyon ngayong 2022 ay para daw pigilan yung axis of evil ng Duterte and Marcos. At kanina, nag-manifest yun by highlighting his platforms on recovering the ill-gotten wealth of the Marcoses as well as the excavation of the remains of the late dictator sa libingan ng mga bayani. On the Dutertes naman, Calyodi also took a swipe on the Dutertes medyo tinira niya ng konti si Sara Duterte and si President Rodrigo Duterte. He even compared Sara Duterte to his father. Sabi niya kung ano daw yung puno, siya yung bunga, referring to the proposed mandatory military service ni Sara Duterte. At ganoon din, nagpatama din siya kay Duterte. He said na parang yung mga pinangako ni Duterte, especially for the farmers during the 2016 elections ay hindi yun totoo. Ito yung mga false promises lang, unlike nung kanyang agrarian reform platforms na inahatid para sa mga magsasaka. So yun yung naging highlight ng performance kanina ni Calyode during the KBP interviews.
Thank you, Jairo. I think Lian has a question for you.
Yes, syempre no, yung presence ng isang progressive and labor leader was really a milestone, and I think it came as a shock to some kasi first time nilang maririnig ko sa presidential forum those kinds of progressive use wealth tax, hindi magbayad ng utang. Ang tanong ko kay Jairo is, was he able to really explain how he will implement kasi they all sound so fantastic and probably to his base ang gandang pakinggan, pero for you, was he able to clearly establish the roadmap with which he can implement these parang very progressive programs?
Alam nyo, to be honest, laging sa napapansin ko na trend kay Calyode the past weeks and months sa interviews niya, although maganda yung mga programs niya, malinaw at concrete yung mga execution plans niya, minsan yung mga how-tos, laging pina-follow up sa kanya, especially during the DCRH interviews. At kanina napansin ko din, medyo kulang lang ng konti sa explanation on how he's going to roll out these plans, these platforms, especially the wealth tax. Laging tinatanong sa kanya yun. And until now, as a journalist covering him, ako personally, hindi pa rin ako masyadong nalilinawan, in my own opinion, kung paano niya i-roll out yung wealth tax, especially na gusto niya na 20% yung one-time 20% tax doon sa 250 richest families in the country. So personally, ako medyo nakukulangan pa ako sa rollout. Tinanong din kanina, paano pag yung Congress ay hindi to sinuportahan? Kasi alam naman natin, lahat ng laws natin kailangan dumaan sa Congress. So sabi niya, magkakaroon doon ng People's Initiative or gagamitin niya yung People's Initiative, i-mobilize niya yung mga tao para mapasa yung batas na ito. So, doon meron namang concrete plan, no? Pero alam niya sa sarili niya na medyo mahihirapan siya, especially that the Congress would not hindi papadalain ng Congress na maipasa ito.
Like, what are the realistic difficulties of something like a People's Initiative?
Oh, I can probably speak from direct experience. I was part of the group that tried to have a People's Initiative against pork. This was after the Supreme Court decided not support, and then that happened, and then we wanted, okay, let's stop pork once and for all. Hindi lang at the minimum, you have to get 3% of all voters in any district. That in itself is very hard in a country where we know that elite politicians, are lording over districts, no? Ang maganda dyan, if you do succeed, and it passes a referendum, is hindi basta-basta yan mababalik ng mga nasa Kongreso. They cannot repeal or amend that unless may more than 2/3 majority sila. So that is going to have a bigger hurdle to overturn. But it's very, very hard. We didn't even come near any success there.
Maraming salamat, Jairo. We'll be calling on the other reporters covering other presidential candidates in a bit. So nabanggit nga natin, no, parang kumbaga dry run to ng future debates. COMELEC will be sponsoring debates. Again, hindi naman compulsory for candidates to attend these debates, but red flag nga daw sabi ng COMELEC kung hindi dumalo. What are your thoughts on the format? 3 hours siya, pero parang ang daming topics na na-touch on. Baka yung iba, hindi enough yung time to touch on these complicated topics. Who wants to comment on the format of the KBP forum? John, I think yes.
Sorry. Maybe I can start and point out the obvious, that there were too many men. It seemed like Karen Davila was the token female, and then you had, these are all excellent journalists, but what it's called, a male all-male panel. does not. I mean, it's already 2022. I mean, we need to break out of that thinking. And then also, I was struck by the fact that the provincial representatives of the KBP were also men. Yeah, we need to do better on that, and I hope the COMELEC takes this finding into consideration.
It was pointed out na earlier na ang daming parang things like women's issues weren't discussed at all, and maybe that's also a result of having a predominantly male panel during the forum. Anyone else? What worked? What didn't work? I think maybe the intro was a little, I don't want to say jarring. It was a little dragging kasi sunod-sunod may 5-minute PowerPoints, no? All the candidates. What do you think, guys?
Can I say something, Bea? Yeah.
Yes.
Kasi of course, we had the famous internet problem of Vice President Lenny. And then number 2, we had the famous echo in the studio, which was quite stressful. And then number 3, the production people did not stop the clock when there was a follow-up question from the panelists. This may be small technical details, but because we wanted to hear more from the candidates, sana next time, anyway, we're all experimenting. We appreciate what the KBP is doing. Next time is to be more rigorous with the details.
Yeah. Kasi napakalaking platform nito, 'di ba, all over the country. Sayang naman yung time ng mga kandidato na nilaan for this forum. What else worked for you aside from actually, kung mapansin nyo, predominantly female yung forum naman yung panel naman ng Rappler, binabawi namin yung imbalance kanina. JC, you wanted to talk about wealth tax?
Yes, just coming back to that, I was just going to mention that there are some countries, for example, France, Portugal, and Spain, that have experimented with the wealth tax, but they have been met with mixed success. I think it's quite difficult to implement a wealth tax at this point, especially in the next administration. But there are other ways of going about this. For example, you want a more progressive tax system to undo the regressive effects of the train law, for example, in the Duterte administration's tax reform agenda. And you can also, the delivery of public goods more progressive. But again, this goes back to the implementation of the Mandanas ruling. How are you going to make sure that the delivery of basic necessities and services are equitable at the local level? Some LGUs might have an advantage when it comes to the windfalls that they might get. So that's the bigger problem, I think, more than the wealth tax. How do you implement a more progressive tax and public service delivery system?
JC, gusto ko lang itanong kasi parang while parang the questions leaned heavily on the economy, ganun, di ba? Yung how to fund these grand projects, these grand proposals. Do you think the format gave candidates then enough time to parse out their plan to fund these plans that they have?
Well, not if your internet connection is spotty and if the clock doesn't stop when the interviewers are making the questions. But yes, I think, of course, there are inherent limitations when it comes to laying down detailed plans in these types of discussions. So you really have to have a direct message, put your main key messages up front. And that's not impossible, but I think the candidates can do better next time.
Oo nga, ako lang ba na-bother doon na nagra-run pa rin yung time kahit hindi na kandidato yung nagtatanong, kahit na nagsasalita rather, kahit yung tanong kinakain yung time, no? So parang
right.
A point for, yeah.
Marga, Bea, may I
Yes.
raise another point?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
About the format, I think that the organizers of any forum or debate should penalize presidential candidates who do not show up. And I hope that the COMELEC takes this into account. So, for instance, there should be an empty chair to represent the absence of Bongbong Marcos. I know it's difficult in a virtual town hall format like the KBP forum, but if not for some of the candidates mentioning Marcos, people would not have seen for themselves that he was missing. And I just wish that the future formats can include that.
Although he wasn't there were several questions related to the Marcos wealth. We'll
That's
talk about that a little more later on. Meanwhile, we welcome Mara Cepeda. She covers Leni Robredo for the 2022 elections. Yung kandidato na kanina medyo hirap yung internet connection. Mara, yes.
Hi.
Hello, Mara.
Hello. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
So what happened there?
That the Wi-Fi issues of VP Lenny really tainted what could have been a really good performance in this KBP forum. I've covered VP Lenny for a while now, and I know that she usually shines, especially under time pressure. But because she had to borrow an office, hindi nila kontrolado yung Wi-Fi today. That really worked to her disadvantage. So what happened there was, I guess before the KBP schedule was finalized, she already had plans to visit Surigao and Dinagat Islands today kasi ipapahatid niya yung kanilang mga pabahay na tulong para dun sa mga na tamaan ng Typhoon Odette noon last year, and she wanted to do this before the campaign period. And VP Lenny herself said it's the Wi-Fi issue is really her mistake. It's really her fault dahil she insisted on her staff na wag magka-cancel ng mga engagements today, make it happen. And so the plan instead was to borrow an office near the airport para right after the program they'll be able to fly to Surigao and Dinagat. And the problem is hindi siguro nila na-test ng maayos yung Wi-Fi issue. And so, what could have been a time for VP Lenny to really just let the people focus on what she has to say, deliver it well, improve on her manner of delivery. Na-distract pa tuloy yung tao dun sa kanyang Wi-Fi issues. Nakabalik siya, pero the quality of the video isn't as good. The background, hindi ganun kaganda as compared to the other candidates. And for the sole female aspirant like Leni Robredo, these things are important because people usually tend to nitpick when it comes to female candidates. And so the expectation has always been everything is perfect, which is, very disappointing in our society. But these are things that she and her team could have avoided. But they didn't. They did the best that they could, of course. Nakita natin, they have shared photos of, VP Lenny holding a landline para nadidinig niya yung tanong. And but yeah, this faux pas could have been, avoided had they just decided to do the form in their office where there's stable Wi-Fi at walang, any other issues sana.
To give credit to her though, she wasn't frazzled, or at least she didn't seem frazzled by what was probably a very stressful situation earlier. I think Lian has a question for you, Mara.
Yes.
Ako na lang yung magtatanong kasi wala naman yung kandidato ko. So I guess this is our life, our expected life. Ako na lang yung tagatanong. And John, yung sinabi mo kanina, I think James Jimenez had already announced that kung sino man yung absentee, it will be represented by an empty chair and an empty forum with a nameplate. So, para glaring yung absence nila. Anyway, my question for Mara is actually, hindi niya kasi nasagot dahil na rin sa format nung time, which is what Edlin Gao was asking. I think she began to say there will be no guarantee that the FOI will be implemented kasi President Aquino failed. Ano ba yung kanyang, if meron na siyang mas comprehensive platform that she's mentioned probably before, kung hindi niya mapapasa yung FOI law, how different will her FOI-EO be than President Duterte's? Kasi yung FOI-EO ni President Duterte is actually close to useless at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, VP Lenny has not elaborated on what an executive order like that will be contained. So it's something that we have to confront her with. She's going to kick off her campaign period, and that's something that we can follow up with her next week. So, but she did say that that she will sign an EO, a full disclosure bill EO. Para when if she becomes president, she will certify the full disclosure bill sa Congress, and while that is still pending in Congress, she will be doing the EO already para there is going to be pressure on all government offices to be transparent in their transactions.
Thank you, Mara. Mara reports on Leni Robredo's campaign for the 2022 elections. Nabanggit ni Mara din kanina, di ba, yung medyo hindi na control ni Leni fully, ni VP Robredo fully yung background niya. Let's talk about the image the candidates are projecting or want to project during this forum. Kasi unlike, the traditional forum na nasa studio ka ito, hawak nila yung background nila, hawak nila yung symbols na nakikita mo behind them. I think yung isa kong napansin, yung background ni Manila Mayor Isko Moreno, napakamalakanyang vibes ng kanyang presentation. Deliberate, well, I would think it's deliberate, right?
Ako, yeah, yung kay Isko, yung talagang nag-stand out sa akin. I think he wants to be able to show that he has the chops for the presidency. Kaya siguro nilagay niya yung very Manila vibes as compared to Senator Pacquiao, who could have probably used the Senate background, pero hindi, baka gusto niyang maging mas relatable.
Yeah, if I could chime in, yes. I paid particular attention to the deliberate images that they had chosen. So yes, I certainly saw that in Isko, yung mayor of parang barong, and then with the blue drapes and so on. Senator Ping had the flag beside him, although his setting was a little more informal, parang nasa sala. Manny Pacquiao had a glimpse of the flag, but it's mostly boxing symbols in the back. I was really touched by the image of by the setting of Calyodi. Very simple, plain white background with some, I don't know, they were like diplomas or at the back. Why is it important for us to focus on these things? Because while it's important also to zero in on the text of what they said, it's also important for us to come to terms with the context. Okay, what else are they saying, and how are they saying it? In fact, we can go on later. Maybe we can talk about the language, the kind of language that they use. But I really thought that they put a lot of thinking into the backgrounds that they ended up using.
Which is, I mean, in fairness, even I think critically about what my background is when I dial in from my house. Joining us in this stream is Pia Ranada, who covers Isko Moreno for the 2022 elections. Pia, kamusta si Yorme? How did he do given the constraints and the format of this forum?
I think he did well in looking put together. He was very in control, calm, and if na-notice nyo, siya yung nag-iisang candidate na hindi naka-cut off, hindi siya harried, hindi siya stressed. Parang I think there wasn't even a moment when he went past the time limit. So he was also very aware of the need to not get lost in the details, especially alam niya na yung mga nanonood, hindi naman lahat concerned about nitty-gritty, right, of platform. So if I noticed that he would start with the general principle, like general muna, like sasabihin niya, education is important for a former squatter boy, or kailangan natin talaga hikayatin ng ating kababayan na patuloy mangarap, and then dun siya bababa to the nitty-gritty of his platform, yung 1:1,000 doctor ratio. So parang I felt that he was really aware that he needed to capture also the attention of people who might not really care so much about policy but more of like yung personality or yung principles ng candidate. He also had an effort to be more enumerated and structured in his responses, which I think was a plus. He really looked like he was in control of himself and of his answers. And like sinabi niyo, very presidential yung dating niya. Also an effort to clearly cite his platform. Like there were numbers there. They actually did come from his 10-point Bilis Kilos platform, which he launched like a few days before that. So he also made an effort to cite yung kanyang Manila track record, which was done in great effect when he answered the hospital question, diba? But poorly done when he was asked paano yung generation suffering from lack of face-to-face education. Kasi diba at one point, you're gonna ask yourself, parang, we're asking you what you will do as president, not what you've done as Manila mayor. So, palaging may ganong balancing action ginagawa. But I talked to his team right after the debate, and they said that, to prepare, si Isko Moreno daw really took the morning to internalize his platform. Then from 7 a.m. to 8:15, he had coffee with two of his campaign team members to prep for possible questions. So I guess that preparation worked well for him. Although may mga fails, like hindi niya naman nasagot masyado yung kanyang campaign, yung excess campaign funds, diba? Like he always kept saying na, nagbayad naman ako ng tax. That's the most important thing. When obviously, di talaga niya na sinagot yung question na tama ba yung ginawa mo? Is it ethically right? And could it have been spent in a better way?
I'm curious because Pia brought it up already, no? Parang how do you balance that? How do candidates balance that? Yung magre-relay ka ng information but at the same time magpro-project, or is that even a question na parang is one more important than the other when you're in a forum like that, in a format that has quite, a tight time limit for you to speak?
Yeah, kasi I think there are some times when candidates get lost in the details and even in using words that average voters won't understand. Like, we know that these are very hard and complex policy questions, but at the same time, you lose an opportunity, given the very limited airtime, diba? You need to capture the attention of all voters, not just like the super nerdy, geeky economist watching or the agriculturist watching. Like, what about the teenager watching or the someone who may not understand highfalutin economic terms. So definitely may balance being tried that these candidates are trying to strike. And sometimes may miss sila, like minsan is too much motherhood statement, nawawala yung concrete plans or yung process medyo malabo. I think I also saw that with Senator Manny Pacquiao, di ba? Parang medyo na-lost siya dun sa kanyang parang tax revenue collection, etc. So definitely it's a struggle for them, and I think that Isko might have benefited from the format because parang he could say na he didn't get too much into the detail kasi onti nga lang yung time, but at the very least hindi siya nag-overtime and he still didn't look like stressed and harried like the others.
Yeah, hi. I was just going to point out, and maybe Pia, you know this already, that Isko said at one point na parang siya lang daw mag-isa ang nag-declare ng excess funds. Pero hindi again, maybe a bit of fact-checking lang. In 2013, it was our editor Miriam Grace Go who pointed out that there were at least 4 senators who declared excess funds dun sa kanilang statement of expenses sa COMELEC. Si Bam Aquino, Nancy Binay, Senator Montaño. So hindi lang siya, hindi lang aware siguro sa Isko na nagdi-declare din yung iba ng excess campaign funds.
Right. Bukod kay Isko, were there other candidates na sa tingin nyo parang was precisely able to do that, not drown in the detail and the nitty-gritty of their policies and their proposals, but at the same time, facts-based pa rin, numbers-based pa rin yung projection nila or yung pag-communicate nila ng mga plano nila? Inday?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sofia. You can go first.
Well, I just wanted to briefly bring up Senator Ping Lacson. I think he was able to do that well, and I think that's where you see really the experience of him being a senator, a lawmaker for many years come in. Because, for example, when we talk about, I earlier touched on how I wish we talked more about the pandemic. Of course, the whole forum need not be dedicated solely to that, but then for Senator Ping Lacson in the very end talking about universal healthcare and how he would simply fund the law. Because at the moment he pointed out very rightly so that it's underfunded, and simply saying that okay, we'll make sure that 260 billion will be given and appropriated to this law. And I think that's one area where he shined during this forum, speaking about adequately answering some of those hard, tough policy questions, but not drowning into the details. And so he's definitely one candidate who stood out to me in terms of managing that balance that you said.
Ako naman, Bea, if I can. Ay, sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I was a bit overwhelmed when Pacquiao mentioned his 22-point agenda. I wondered if he had any time to discuss that, but I think he did well with his health acronym: health, housing, education, ayuda, and agriculture, livelihood, and health. That really captures well what needs to be done to reverse the effects of the pandemic recession. So kudos to him, or plus points for that.
You're on mute, Inday.
I agree that Lacson was very good in stressing certain points. At the same time, he wasn't, he didn't bury himself in jargon. I think that's very important. Um, Personally, 1 minute is a little bit iffy for me as as a starting point in discussing. I'd like to see it just type man lang 1 minute and a half, but there it is. It shows also some amount of discipline when candidates stick to it, as Scott did relatively, because when they start crumbling and they're cut off, it's never really nice to see. Una, bitin ka because they haven't really gotten into the main meat of the matter, and two, a lot of what they've said actually could have been um, cut from their message. But there's also one thing I'd like to stress when Pia says, when Pia mentioned Isko's answer to excess campaign funds, and yun nga, nagbayad daw ng taxes. It strikes me, no, yung the legally allowable and the ethically um, problematic decisions, which also brings me to Senator Lacson when he answered the questions about why did he, go on the lam when he was being accused for the Sir Corbito murder, and he kept on insisting na nasa batas yan, pwede yan, basta may abogado ka. But he was a legislator. There's iba yung okay. And my thought bubble then, how many right now involved in numerous scandals, corruption, thievery, would say, aha, there we go. And in one sense, really, it does delay justice.
I want to pick up on what Inday said, but I want to thank Pia for joining us today. Thank you, Pia. She covers Scott Moreno for the 2022 elections. We have Aika Ray on the line. Aika Ray will be joining us in this panel. Hi, Aika. Medyo malaginto ang background ni Senator Pacquiao kanina. How did he do? Medyo, I think you heard what we were discussing earlier also, no? In the drowning in the details and or parang surviving. Or rather packaging their message properly so that they don't drown in the details. How did he do, Aika?
Actually, dun sa pinakasimula, no, makikita natin na medyo nag-struggle si Senator Pacquiao. I'm not sure also if he saw the timer, no? Kasi I think he went on speaking, but then, yun na nga, nung pagdating sa dulo, medyo na-cut off talaga siya. So he wasn't able to finish yung sinasabi niyang health na acronym. So as JC mentioned no, earlier, I think medyo overwhelming na inilabas nila yung 22 rounds agenda nila, and medyo maraming details, ay medyo marami siya, no, 22 points. But then yung health actually is a good follow-up kasi dun talaga makikita kung ano yung priorities ng magiging administrasyon niya kung siya man yung mananalo. Although for the rest of the forum, parang medyo mapapansin mo no na si Senator Pacquiao actually is trying very hard to stick no to ano yung palagi nilang sinasabi. Pag tinatanong na siya ng details, doon na siya medyo nalolost eh. Try niya talagang bumalik dun sa motherhood statement sa sinasabi niya. So also, yun nga, I think this was also mentioned in a way dun sa campaign convos namin with Pia, na meron talagang times na sinasabi ni Senator Pacquiao na kawawa yung mga mahihirap. Although not discounting naman talaga the experiences of people na nahihirapan talaga sila. But I think yung paggamit talaga ng use na kawawa, it somehow removes yung agency ng mga tao for them to uplift themselves. No? So medyo nagkakaroon din siya ng savior na pagpo-project sa sarili niya na this is how this was my life. So yun yung simula niya, this was my life. And I hope ganun din yung gawin ko para sa inyo kapag ako ay maging presidente. So yun yung mga nabanggit niya no, at medyo nahirapan talaga siya. Meron specifically dun sa question na kung paano niya popondohan yung mga proyekto na gusto niyang gawin, no, at mga programs na gusto niyang isulang pag naging presidente siya. And lagi niyang binabalik, even sa ibang interviews, yung paggamit niya ng non-tax revenue income. And medyo interested din ako malaman kung ano yung insights ni JC on this. Kasi yung gusto niya babaan yung corporate taxes, but also gusto niya i-strengthen yung non-tax revenue income. But then, ano ba talaga yung exactly gusto niyang palakasin dito? Kasi yung non-tax revenue income, actually pag narinig yun ng masa, parang ang talino pakinggan, pero anong ibig sabihin noon? So, dun nagkukulang, no? Ano ba yung kailangan niyang gawin para mapataas yung non-tax revenue income, maliban doon sa pag-explain niya kung ano yung non-tax revenue income. So, interested ako to know ano yung pwede masabi ni JC.
JC, ano nga ba itong non-tax revenue income na binabanggit pa ulit-ulit ni Senator Pacquiao?
Yes, naging cliche na nga niya ito, pero kung titingnan mo yung data, actually yung non-tax revenues ng gobyerno natin constitutes only 10% ng total revenues for any given year. 90% o karamihan talaga ng kinikita ng gobyerno ay tax revenues. And I think this has more to do with the structure of the economy at yung pinagdaanan nating recession or economic crisis. Kasi one way to boost yung revenues ay pasiglahin natin muna yung ekonomiya. So ang top priority talaga ay ibalik natin yung dating sigla ng production, yung as measured by GDP, and nakakabit doon yung pandemic response. Kaya hindi magre-recover yung ating economy kung hindi maayos yung pandemic response natin na moving forward. Pero ayun maganda rin nabanggit yung tungkol dun sa corruption, pero I think wag tayo masyadong umasa doon sa non-tax revenues.
John, you wanted to say something about the discussion of candidate ethics. And I think medyo may halo din dito si Senator Pacquiao because he was asked again about him doling out money left and right during before the official campaign period. John?
Parang hindi natapos ni Manny Pacquiao yung sagot, ano?
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, actually.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute myself.
It's okay. It's part of the pains of online.
I was really struck by Inday's point about situations that are legally allowed but ethically problematic. And in fact, it pertains to 3 of the candidates there. No? So, Ping Lacson about going into hiding, Isko Moreno about retaining campaign funds, and Manny Pacquiao about doling out before the campaign period. And if we look at it from a higher perspective, I think we're looking at essentially what they're saying is this is what we can get away with. And really, that's part of the problem with Philippine politics, what we can get away with. Now, of course, Marcos is on a different level because he's trying to get away not only with ethically problematic matters, but downright illegal matters. So, he's on a higher level. But I think it's important to point out that really this boils down to a political practice, getting away with stuff.
Lian Buan, you cover the Sandigan Bayan. Ano masasabi mo tungkol sa ito? Parang normalized, no? Normalized na practice in Philippine politics.
Oo nga, kaya nga gustong-gusto ko sana yung tanong ni Robbie Alampay kanina na binaboy na ang checks and balances. He basically called the Supreme Court weak and the Ombudsman an enabler. So I would have wanted a more comprehensive answer about that. Pero sabi mo nga, as pointed out by John, ang hirap namang manggaling sa kanila yon when they in fact are admitting on national TV that they have availed of such maneuverings to alam mo yun, para to get away with something. Like for example, yung into hiding ni Senator Lacson, he keeps saying, well, there's a Supreme Court decision and I was advised by lawyers na okay lang to. Pero, di ba, if you compare it to people who are arrested on petty offenses na wala namang ganong klaseng resort to lawyers who will afford them na magtago ka, ganyan. And yung out ni Senator Pacquiao na hindi pa naman campaign period so pwede pa akong mamigay ng pera. These are things that an ordinary person will never get away with. Remember, they jailed thousands of people just for not wearing their masks properly. So As a last point to this discussion, no, parang sana gusto kong magkaroon din ng mas marami pang tanong about how they will strengthen the justice system, kasi perennial problem naman na yun, but I don't think I have heard, and it's understandable kasi pandemic yung ano natin, yung focus natin ngayon, but justice is a very big factor of the pandemic, as we saw human rights are violated. So I'm looking forward to more questions on the justice system actually.
Thank you for pointing that out. Parang hindi nga masyadong na-parse out, no? Yung the justice, or there was a question towards the end about human rights, but it wasn't really a focal point of the discussion. Ay, yung tanong na tutukol sa pag-dole out ni Senator Pacquiao, na paulit-ulit na tinatanong to, has he been changing his answers? Is it the same reasoning every time he's asked about it?
No, actually hindi siya nagpapalit ng sagot, no. Palagi lang yung sinasabi. Pag tinanong yan, palagi mong maririnig na noong 2002 pa ako nagsimula magmigay ng pera, no. Sinasabi niya lang na lumalaki lang yung pinamimigay niya over the years, nagkaroon ng bigas, from 500 naging 5,000. So, same line. At palagi niya sinasabi na hintayin na lang natin dahil wala naman akong nilalabag na batas. February 8 pa naman yung start ng campaign season. At doon na lang tayo titigil, no. So, yun yung palagi niyang sinasabi every now and then na matatanong yun. Although itong question na to, I think yung follow-up is very important, no? Hindi ba parang nagko-contribute siya sa culture of corruption when he himself is running against corrupt politicians? So ang ginawa niya na lang is nag-zero in siya doon sa technicality. So same answer pa rin, even if it was an entirely different question, no? So I think yung sagot niya doon, na-miss niya talaga yung point ng question. So the question is on parang morality. It's not on technicality.
Ay, may interesting na question si John dito. May estimate ba tayo kung magkano na kaya yung nagastos din ni Senator Pacquiao? Is that even a question that can be answered, or his camp is willing to answer at this point?
I think medyo mahirap to track kasi at first they started giving out releases na parang kung magkano yung binibigay nila tsaka kung ano. And kung ilan yung umattend ng mga sorties. But now medyo mahirap din. Also kasi they stopped going around because of the surge, 'di ba? But then namigay din kasi sila nung time ng Odette. So yun ang medyo mahirap ding i-track for now. But I guess that will be a question, no? Kasi tinanong din siya exactly. I just can't remember. I think it was DZRH or DZBB na interview. He was asked how much na, but he tried to dodge lang just to say na tumataas yung pinamigay ko from 500 to 1,000. Bea.
Thank you. Aika covers Senator Manny Pacquiao for Rappler. Thank you, Aika. Okay, we'll be bringing in Rambo next, but what do you guys think? Are there other things that stood out from the forum earlier, or things that you wish they addressed more?
Well, can I say something, Bea?
Yes, Marites.
I just wanted to point out that during the forum, parang hindi masyadong issue yung si President Duterte kasi lumabas, well, at least in this forum, na-mention siya in connection with build, but not even mentioning his name. Sinasabi lang, itutuloy namin yung maganda sa build. Then yung second, on corruption sa Farmally. So maybe for discussion, magiging issue ba itong Duterte administration? Magiging campaign issue kaya siya itong incoming campaign season? I think John was saying something earlier. Anyways, Rambo here already? Sorry.
I want to pick up on that because Pia had a beautiful story about the role or the non-role of Duterte in the 2022 elections. There is no continuity candidate in the strictest sense. Wala siyang in-endorse na kandidato. Gaano kalaking role or magiging role or ipipilit na role ni President Duterte in the 2022 elections?
I was told by kay Mayor Chavit Singson na if President Duterte chooses to endorse a candidate that's not Bongbong Marcos, the only effect for him would be that makaka-gain yung candidate na yun and the opposition, but it will not really chip away at the number of Marcos. Ganun sila ka-confident. But I think at this point, alam din nila the importance of that Marcos endorsement. That's why hindi talaga the Marcos's strategy of silence extends especially to President Duterte kahit tinira na siya dati pa.
And also, Isko Moreno has been courting Duterte's endorsement, no? So yun yung inaabangan kung sino ang i-endorse niya. Pero interesting talaga na walang candidate talaga na pitching for continuity except for some parts of Duterte's program lang. So, unique. I think this will be a unique election until maybe if Duterte endorses someone.
Yeah.
I
I just
think
want to add. Go ahead, John.
Just a quick point. This might actually work to the advantage, to the further advantage of Marcos. The opposition and even those who do not see themselves as part of the opposition have been preparing for an anti-Duterte campaign in 2022. So it's taking some time to pivot to Marcos. So the fact that Duterte is not right now a major campaign issue might actually work to the benefit of Bongbong.
For background lang, because I cover Sara Duterte in the elections, parang even for Sara, she's not labeling herself explicitly as the continuity candidate, although she does mention, she thanks the crowd na salamat sa pagsuporta niyo sa Administration Duterte. And even if PDP Laban has endorsed nga Sara also as their adopted vice presidential candidate, parang hindi ganun ka explicit na ipagpapatuloy namin ang programa ng ang Duterte administration. But let's not talk about that muna kasi presidential forum yung iniisip natin ngayon. We will be joined by Rambo Talabong. He covers Senator Panfilo Lacson in the 2022 elections. Rambo, how did the senator do? Parang pansin ko parang very stoic, very consistent siya in his message and in his manner of sending that message across during the forum.
Actually, na-touch na rin ng panelists natin to kanina, Bea, and I appreciate our panelists pointing it out. This format really worked to the advantage of Senator Ping Lacson. Feeling ko talagang sanay siya sa ganito na parang Senate hearing siya all over again na meron siyang PowerPoint tapos alam niya meron siyang limited time. And conscious siya na meron nanunood, kaya as pointed by Pia, alam din niya yung balance kung ano yung statistic na i-draw-drop niya, kung ano maintindihan ng mga tao at hindi maintindihan ng mga tao. As usual, yung kanyang problem area is yung kanyang pagtatago. And that question has always been practiced by Senator Lacson as in years na yung kanyang pinagdaanan sa pagsagot dito sa tanong na to. At sa tingin ko, mahalagang paulit-ulit yung tinatanong sa kanya. But overall, talagang consistent siya. Stoic nga, tamang binanggit mo, Bea, but it matched the energy of other candidates. It might be stoic. Some people would say that it's boring. But compared to some other candidates na parang nirorush sila nung clock, nirorush sila ng buzzer beater, si Senator Lacson, he was quite in the same league as Isko Moreno, setting his own pace. Hindi siya nagpapapayag na biglang magsasalita yung panelist na parang sesermonan siya sa dulo. He ends it a few seconds before the end of the buzzer. So hindi siya nasesermonan. Natatapos siya kung kailan niya kailangan. Tapos yung kanyang naratibo ay consistent din. Sinimulan niya yung debate by saying that this is a war that someone has to be prepared to be in. Dapat handa tayong sasabak sa gera. Tapos tinapos ang kanyang statement sa huli. Sinabi niya na, I hope that everybody saw my performance today, that as the dust settles in the battlefield, in the war zone, kita nyo na handa ako. At sa palagay ko, maraming taong nakakita na handa nga si Senator Panfilo Lacson. Meron mga tanong na paulit-ulit na kailangan niya sagutin, pero handa siya ngayong araw na to. Bea?
Rambo, consistent ba to? O nga, nabanggit mo nga, parang very, yung images na he evokes, parang very war, very soldier, kasi syempre nga naman PMA graduate siya. Bago ba to? Or ganito talaga yung plan niya sa simula't simula pa lang ng kampanya?
Itong gantong imahen niya na gera at saka paglaban. Matagal na niya ito sinasabi. Simula pa lang, ang kanyang packaging ay General ng Bayan. Akong General ng Bayan. At sa tingin ko sa pagkakataong ito, biglang kitang-kita natin na okay, parang dito nga lumalabas ang pagka-General ng Bayan niya. Kasi nung mga dating mga forum din naman, napapansin din natin na maayos at saka straight yung mga answers ni Senator Panfilo Lacson. Hindi ganoon ka-emotionally charged. Pero mas nag-excel siya dito sa limited forum ng KBP kung saan mas nasaset niya talaga yung pace at meron siyang script at maayos yung pagkakabasa niya, maayos din yung pagkaka-deliver niya. as a PNP chief, parang general din talaga, nakita ko yung delivery ni Isko, meron siyang hawak na bond paper, binabasa niya. Si Lacson handa siya, meron atang prompter sa likod, yung pagkakaintindi ko. Kasi mukhang wala siya binabasa, pero alam mong scripted at maayos yung kanyang delivery. Parang PNP chief na nagbabasa ng kanyang mga standing orders. At ito ang aking na-accomplish sa aking region. Parang ganun, nagkwento siya sa parang command group, kumbaga, Bea, you understand this dynamics. As in, meron siyang ganong feels na itong update ko at ito ang aking plano. As in, dire-diretso lang.
Para siyang command conference na na-air live across different platforms. Isa siyang general na may bias, or like he always mentions budget reform. JC, you wanted to talk about that?
Yes, parang lumalabas na siya nga lang yung kandidato na parang talking about the budget reform. It's a curious strategy considering that it takes some explaining what budget reform is. Not so many people know about it. We know, of course, that Senator Lacson has made a name for himself as a fiscalizer in the Senate. So yan talaga yung tinututukan niya. Pero it's just curious that somehow he thinks that this is an issue by which he could win or gain support. So it just stands out to me as a rather unique talking point in the presidential fora and interview so far.
Siguro,
Yan ang go, Inday.
okay. I'll just point out, dun sa budget reforms ni Senator Lacson, in fairness sa kanya, hindi lang siya talaga salita, hindi lang siya pagkalkal. He has shunned the use of pork. Kahit na nabibigyan siya ng allocation, hindi niya ginagamit yan talaga. So, in that sense, medyo mukhang ang credentials niya dyan, hindi maka-question. But there is something that bothers me a bit, when he says he doesn't like double standards, yung kanyang stance on what you can get away with is a little bit contradictory dyan sa claim na yan. And also, where masyado siyang nagre-rely rin sa discretionary powers. Let's say, okay, I'm going to set my example, but I won't force them. On the other hand, si Lenny had a very good answer dun sa full disclosure, another bill that's going to face tough challenge in Congress. Kung hindi pa nila I will certify it as urgent. Pag hindi pa nila gagawin, i-executive decision ko. Parang yung SALN, yung pag-waive ng bank secrecy, while we know that the law does protects, those who would otherwise be under a witch hunt, individuals and corporations. Pwede yan kasi ma-amend, pwede yan magbago in the sense that those who exercise power have a little less protection under that law, and yet Lacson has never gone to that point. So my questions,
John?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to what Rambo said. Because in fact, I think we should take a closer look at the language which our candidates used. So Lacson at the start said, kung wag kang sasaba kung hindi ka handa sa gera, and ended by saying after going to that war zone. So this whole war imagery, I think it's actually appropriate for him because he's a former police general, but should actually be disturbing to us. Because our current president ran on a platform of a war on drugs with very real and very serious consequences. Now, I realize that some people might say, this is just metaphor. No, it's just rhetoric. We use war language like campaign and so on and so forth. But I think that we should be very careful about a ready and unthinking resort to traditions like using war language or having all-male panels. These are things that we're used to, but we should actually get rid of them. Now, if you take a look at the language, for instance, used by Mayor Isko, I was struck this time because he seemed to be fashioning himself as a digital entrepreneur type of president. He was talking about a unicorn, like a startup that's worth $1 billion. He was name-checking Elon Musk. This is, for me at least, a new aspect to him, and something again to think about. And as far as Vice President Lenny is concerned, her use even before she went on air about pinushback namin yung schedule to accommodate this. very developmental world. In the development sector, merong, we want to consult and so on and so forth. So I just want to encourage people to pay particular attention to the language, the metaphors that our presidential candidates use, because they might actually not end at the level of metaphor, but become real.
Correct. And it speaks a lot about a person's background, 'di ba? Yung philosophy niya, yung the lens through which a person views the world and of course creates policy. Si Lian ang ating resident questioner. Lian, I think has a question for Rambo.
Oo, kasi si Senator Lacson, napansin ko, he has the tendency to promise very very attractive, tangible promises. Like yung kanina sabi niya, first day in office, he will waive his bank secrecy rights. Pero sabi nga ni Inday, it's discretionary, it's not institutional. So siguro tanong ko kay Rambo, bukod sa kanyang advocacy to fix the budget para wala ng corruption doon, has he really gone in detail kung paano niya gagawing i-waive niya yung bank secrecy niya, and how would he encourage others? Syempre marami rin namang pwede ring maabuso kung nag-waive ka ng bank secrecy, and anong value ng pag-waive ng bank secrecy? Bakit hindi na lang make a lifestyle checks mandatory again through the ombudsman? Bakit hindi ganun? Why should it be this, ako mag-waive ako ng bank secrecy rights?
Yes, Lian. I think it goes back to his own narrative that his leadership style is leadership by example. And that's really appealing. Sasabihin ng isang kandidato na, I do this so other people might be interested in doing this as well. And dun nakikita rin natin yung problema. Once you say leadership by example, it also means that the candidate will not be firm enough to impose onto his subordinates. Yun yung kanyang inaasahan at yun yung imahe na kanyang pinapakita na ako ang inyong tingnan, ako ang inyong tingnan. Pero yung aking mga subordinates, kung hindi nila yung gagawin, hindi ko yun problema. At magiging problema rin yan para sa kanya kasi makikita nga natin, as pointed out by Inday, it might come to our conclusion that it is a problem of double standards. Bakit ikaw, i-insist mo ilalabas yung sa'yo, pero yung mga tao na pwedeng merong suspicion, bakit sa kanila sasabihin mo, ikaw ang bahala? Or sasabihin din niya, yung courts ang bahala kung pag-uusapan naman yung Marcos wealth. So yun, Lian.
Rambo, curious lang ako, ano rin ba to? Parang, is this a result also of his PMA and PNP chief background? Kasi ganun sa PNP, di ba? Kung gagawin ni chief, susunod lahat, matik. Walang questions asked. Kahit na sa kaloob-looban ng puso mo, ayaw mo magpa-drug test, kung sinabi ng PNP chief, drug test lahat. Parang ganun din kaya yun?
I think, again, that's the image that he's trying to assign to this, that people would cling to. Pero kasi matagal na rin naman siyang hindi naging police chief. Ang tagal na rin niya sa Senado. Alam na rin niya yung level of morality, of ethics ng ibang government officials na kahit na ikaw mismo ay magpapakita ng iyong salin at ang iyong mag-waive ng iyong bank secrecy, alam mo hindi mo maaasahan yung ibang official na gagawin yung ginawa mo.
Marites, do you appreciate this language that Senator Lacson seems to be leaning on in the campaign?
Because I remember Ping Lacson a few years back, he seemed to be selling himself as a Duterte-like candidate. That was some years back. A Duterte-like candidate. He may have steel in his body, but he has silk gloves. Parang he's a more, shall I say, tender Duterte. Yeah, ginagamit pa rin niya yung war rhetoric. But of course, we understand nga nagaling siya sa PMA and he's been a police general. So I think yun lang. I think he also wants to capitalize on Duterte's popularity because Duterte is still the most popular president ever, even in his last year in office.
Yeah, a tender tyrant.
Yes, still a tyrant.
Thank you, Rambo. Rambo covers Senator Ping Lacson in the 2022 elections. Ito medyo workshop portion, no? Parang kung kayo, like what parts of the forum would you have changed? What would you have what tweaks would you have made sa format? And even obviously yung isa doon, yung panel, sana mas maraming babae, no? Or sana may babae sa panel at all. Wala. There was not one, no? Woman who asked questions earlier.
Yep.
Because of course Karen was a moderator. So is there kumbaga ano yung dream forum nyo sana if we bring together the presidential candidates again?
if I may start, this whole idea of pressuring candidates to speak in 60 seconds or 90 seconds, I think that's another old tradition that we should rethink. I guess the idea is, it's a substitute for pressure on the candidate if he or she becomes president. But really, it's a very poor way of encouraging public discussion of very important issues. I guess what I'm saying is these very time limited, snap portions, they're overrated. We should stop doing them.
Parang sometimes it makes for good TV, but good TV doesn't necessarily translate into, an enrich. I mean, it's possible, but it's difficult to do. Let's go to Lian Buan because she wants to bring up another thing that was not mentioned earlier during the forum. Lian?
Oo, napansin ko parang di ata nabanggit ang anti-terror law, which is supposed to be the biggest and most, according to petitioners, damaging law ever enacted by the country in contemporary history. So, nagtataka ako kung bakit wala. And it would have been a good topic kasi hindi lang siya human rights and justice, it's also economy kasi and security. If you discuss ATL, you could have grilled Senator Lacson for his sponsorship on a law that had many loopholes and many vague provisions. It would have also been a perfect opportunity for Vice President Leni Robredo to be forced to be more categorical about her stance on the NTF-ELCAC. Kasi yun yung isang criticism sa kanya, di ba, na parang rinerendahan niya yung kanyang criticism on NTF-ELCAC. And it would have also been a good opportunity for Calio to talk about the climate and the climate of fear and the climate of danger that activists like him go through and will go through after the anti-terror law. So ayun, sana nabanggit lang siya. And hindi lang actually nabanggit. It should have been a focal point because as lawyers said, talagang yung dagok sa demokrasya ng anti-terror law malaki. So I'm just wondering why it wasn't included in the KBP forum.
Yeah, and let's not forget, sabi nga ni Lian, it's Lacson who's the main sponsor of the anti-terror law. And that's where the most dangerous display of discretionary powers can be found, when this small group, a council, can designate officials and groups as terrorists. Unfortunately, na-uphold pa yan, pero I think that's under appeal, it's covered by jurisprudence, but siguro if you were a human rights advocate, if you were a person who actually wants to strengthen civil liberties in the country, you can see how difficult it would be to amend, to repeal that very dangerous law if Lacson becomes president of this country.
Of course, with the caveat that this isn't the last forum that we're going to see featuring all the presidential candidates, and debates will be hosted by COMELEC. But Sofia, what questions would have you wanted to ask about the West Philippine Sea, about foreign policy, and even about COVID also sa mga kandidato natin sa pagkapangulo?
No, so I think, for example, what Lian brought up about the anti-terror law, it's these. One reason why I'm frustrated the fact that West Philippine Sea foreign policy didn't come up is because these forums also aren't a chance. They're also a chance to talk to the world, right? Filipinos are listening all over the country, but then the world is also listening, and I think that it's important we talk about these things because they always say, for example, that foreign policy isn't an election issue, but then we've seen over the past 6 years the real consequences of having a misguided foreign policy, for instance. And I would have wanted to hear about how 2022 bets plan to rescue our foreign policy after the Duterte administration. And it's an opportunity for candidates to give their message about what it is they want, why the world should be paying attention to the Philippines. What message are we sending out to other countries? Again, going back to the pandemic, I think we have seen how interconnected we are, right? And it's also an opportunity to talk to Filipinos as well about what it means to be Filipino in the world today. And so it was a missed opportunity to speak not just to Filipinos but also the world who's watching this very important election. And if we're talking also about you know, points that should have been discussed. The reason why I just want to go back again to COVID and pandemic. I think the reason why we really should be talking about this is because it's the underlying issue that we're all experiencing. Right, it's the one of the foremost issues heading into elections, and I think the fact that we're not talking about it or how it's not wholly incorporated into these presidential candidates' plans, it sends to me two messages. One being that, for example, if we're talking about or if we're giving the message of business as usual or trying to go back to how to generate jobs and funding all these ambitious plans, what does it say about all the deaths and suffering that we're willing to stomach because the pandemic really isn't going away? 54,000 Filipinos have died. Many more will continue to die if we don't get the virus under control. And the reason why we want to know this early on, what some of the plans are, is because we have always been, or the reason why there should be plans to talk about this early on is because we've always been like one step behind in our response. And so, we need to stop the reactionary response. And I think we need to demand from these candidates, what direction do they have for us when it comes to this health crisis that we're in.
Marites?
Yes, I was just going to add, sandali lang ito, na kulang na, of course, as you said, Bea, this is not just there will be more presidential interviews and forums. Ano lang nakulangan ako kasi I missed questions on maritime issues. Hindi lang maritime security in the West Philippine Sea, kundi like shipbuilding, inter-island shipping, transport, because we're an island, we're an archipelago. Parang that seems to get lost. It's the railway, okay, it's the highways, but how about inter-island shipping and transportation? Tapos pangalawa, yung importansya ng Coast Guard. Kasi ang Coast Guard, ang ating civilian force, na yun ang nagpapatrol sa ating seas. So importante sila. Pero maybe in the next forum, mabigyan ng importansya din itong mga ganitong issues. Siguro nga, i-divide economy, insurgency, security, foreign policy. Tama yung sabi ni Sofia, nakakamiss. Kasi nga, ina-assume natin na hindi siya election issue.
JC, what are the things that you want future forums, future debates to touch on when they host the presidential candidates again?
Yes, well, I hope to hear more about infrastructure. Nearly everyone said that they would continue the build program in one way or another, but nobody really talked about the need to address bottlenecks in the implementation of infrastructure projects, especially the severe lack of absorptive capacity among many government agencies, both at the national and local levels. And this is especially important since starting this year, 2022, we'll be implementing the Mandanas ruling, which, as I mentioned earlier, would give a significant windfall for more than 300 billion pesos for all LGUs starting this year. But not all of them are ready to spend that huge amount of money. And there's a huge risk that billions of pesos might be wasted and even corrupted starting this year if we don't increase the capacity of LGUs to implement all those projects. Especially, there's also a finding that when government spends more on capital outlays like buildings and other types of hard infrastructure, the larger the risk of not being able to spend the money that you receive. So I think the candidates need to be pressed more on this because a lot of the promises and programs they have laid down really depends on the implementation, especially at the local level.
Thank you, JC. Thank you, everyone. Marami pa tayong pwedeng pag-usapan pero may time limit tayo. But I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their Friday. Hindi kayo nag-cite ng scheduling context. That was a joke. So thank you, Marites. Thank you, John, Inday, JC, Lian, and Sofia. Magkikita-kita pa tayo ulit soon. This has been Bea Cupin. You were watching In the Running. Again, our special coverage of the 2022 national elections. Again, the KBP Forum is only going to be the first of many. We'll be covering the candidates and their campaigns every step along the way. Visit Rappler.com for more on the 2022 elections. And thank you for watching. Bye.